Hi, my name is Bree Beeler, and I work with Cooperative Housing International, the sectoral organization of the International Cooperative Alliance representing housing. Welcome to this week's episode of Co-op Conversations. This podcast features various guests from around the world who are currently working or living in housing cooperatives. You'll discover more about what it's like to live in a housing cooperative through these conversations. We've talked with parents raising families in housing co-ops, retired folks who want to retain their autonomy and not live in expensive retirement homes. We've also talked to teenagers, new immigrants, and the list goes on. In this episode, Julie Lapalme, CHI Secretary General, talks with Ander Zabala Gomez from Sostre Civic in Catalonia, Spain. Now let's get into the episode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome, Ander, to Co-op Conversations. Ander Zabala Gomez is joining us from Barcelona in Catalonia in Spain, and is working with Sostre Civic, a housing cooperative organization based in Catalonia that promotes the right of use cooperative housing model, and which he'll explain in further detail in a few moments. And Sostre Civic has just become a member of Cooperative Housing International in order to learn from the cooperative housing model used in other countries, and also to spread the model that Sostre Civic is using in Catalonia with the rest of the world. So welcome, Ander. Thank you very much for agreeing to doing this podcast. This is I think our 11th podcast that we're recording, and we're talking to different people who live in housing co-ops, who work in cooperative housing organizations like Sostre Civic, to learn about this flexible housing model that is very different in different parts of the world, and there's always something new to learn. So I'm looking forward to finding out more about Sostre Civic. So welcome, and I'll let you introduce yourself and the work that you do with Sostre Civic.
So thank you very much, Julie, for giving us the opportunity to be here. I am Ander Zabala. I'm collaborating with Sostre Civic, doing an internship, and I'm responsible for the international dimension of the cooperative. And Sostre Civic, it's a housing cooperative, a right to use housing cooperative, which is a third way model between rent and buying. And it's also an association that promotes this new model in Catalonia, where it's focused.
Nice. So you're doing an internship. So is this part of your study program?
I already finished my global studies degree and focused my final thesis in the housing cooperatives in Denmark, the many associations. And this is why I also wanted to engage in the local housing cooperative movement, which it's standing for the right to housing in the long term, against the speculation, and in a collective manner. Currently, the Sostre Civic and its team is made of 21 workers, between members of the cooperative and contracted people. And Sostre Civic is also supported by 1,000 members that expect to live or are currently living in housing cooperatives under the right to use tenure form.
So tell us a bit more about this right to use model. Can you explain that to us?
Well, yes. In fact, Sostre Civic activity is divided into two branches. One of them is the promotion of the model that I will just now explain, and the other branch is the development side, where it promotes the development of several projects and buying of buildings, refurbishing, and so on. So the model, what's Sostre Civic's model? In here, Sostre Civic owns the property of the whole building, and the members have the right to use the apartment and for an unlimited period of time, while paying a monthly fee similar to rent, but lower in price because it's below market prices. And apart from that, the members of the cooperative have to pay an initial contribution that helps to finance the project, and it's normally about 30% of the whole investment. So the main features of this model is that it's not for profit, which makes this housing form way more affordable than those that intend to make money with the use of housing, and see housing as a market, sees housing as something where you can invest, whether Sostre Civic sees housing a place where you can live in a secure way, stable in the long run, because these projects, despite being a bit hard to develop, because on average you need like 3, 4, 5 years to finish or to end up living in one of them, then you can live there unlimitedly. Yes, this would be more or less the main features of the model.
And is it mostly new housing, or is there like old, existing housing as well?
So there is a quite wide variety of projects. There are newly built projects. There are also ones that have been refurbished, already constructed ones that have been empty due to the financial crisis that Sostre Civic managed to buy, and this way fill them with dwellers. And there have been also rural projects of quite unpopulated areas, and promoting not only housing but also professional projects in those areas. So it's a bit of everything, not only newly constructed buildings nor refurbishing.
And is it only in the Catalonia region?
Yes, the area of action of Sostre Civic, it's in Catalonia, which is a territory in Spain where 7.5 million people live, and it may expand to Valencia and the Balear Islands, but for the moment it's just acting in Catalonia.
And how many members does Sostre Civic have at the moment?
So currently we just passed over 1,000 members, and almost 250 of them are currently living or will live in the following year as their project finishes. And the rest, the 750 people that are not living now, but some of them belong to some groups and others are in the waiting lists of these cooperatives, because the way to access one of these buildings is either forming your own group or waiting to a housing to be emptied and accessed by order of joining to a cooperative.
One of the objectives as well of Sostre Civic is to promote the cooperative housing model, because if I understand correctly, it's the ownership model is the much more current dominant model. So how are you doing this promotion, educational work?
Well, yes, in fact, in Spain, since Franco's dictatorship, the private property tenure form was and is still the main one. 70%, more than 70% of people lives under this tenure form. Almost the rest of it's rental, and just 3% is public housing. So this implies that the right to housing it's not been guaranteed, and in this sense, what Sostre Civic shows is a third way, not buying, not rental. It introduces to the society a whole new concept, which is the collective property. The collective property, while assuring your privacy and your intimacy in your own apartment that you can use as much as you want. And this is a very important role in Sostre Civic's activity, because it breaks a lot of myths regarding housing and regarding the way some people can live, and even sharing common areas in the building, and sharing not only space, but projects and linked to the neighborhood, and a whole series of values that we'll talk later on that Sostre Civic promotes. In order to promote this model, Sostre Civic, together with the rest of the main stakeholders, are united in the sectorial organization of the Solidarity Economy Network. And it's through this collaborative platform that they try to do political influence to the city councils, but also to the territorial and state governments. And this it also shows which is the attitude of this model that they are creating. It's not competitive, it's collaborative, and above all, this is not for profit, and that's a key of the model, one of the keys.
And so just to touch on the political aspect, so you're doing advocacy work with local governments. Are you doing it at the regional or like at the territorial level as well?
Yes, in fact, Sostre Civic was born in 2004 when there were not contracted nor anyone working, was everything volunteer work. And now with more than, I'd say, tens of individual cooperatives, as well as another foundation, La Dinamo, they are promoting this model to mainly the City Council of Barcelona, which is the one which has committed the most with this way of developing, but also to the Catalan government. But this has been quite recently, and it's still difficult to arrive to these levels of the government, because the current percentage of people living or promoting housing cooperative projects in Catalonia, it's really, really low in percentage. This is why this political work is so relevant and so difficult at the time, without the resources that the rest of the stakeholders in the housing and real estate market have. They are really powerful, and their capacity to influence fiscal or other kind of economic measures, it's difficult to tackle in this sense. And particularly, Sostre Civic doesn't have a direct link with the government and with the officials, but it's the whole sector that develops the talks. So that's also interesting, because assumes that it's not its own role, but it's the role of every housing cooperative, right, to use housing cooperatives to develop this work. This part of Sostre Civic's activity, together with the production of content, the dissemination, the talks, the conferences, the participation in symposiums, is developed by the association, while the cooperative develops and does the more technical activities, such as the architecture, economic, and facilitation of the groups of its own projects. It's a bit differentiated, despite they fall under the same umbrella organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a lot of different avenues to be involved in. Yeah, and they're all, you know, important aspects of developing a housing model that especially, you know, in your situation, that is not common. So you're having to pave the way to change the legal framework in order to facilitate, you know, more development. So what kind of members does Sostre Civic have? Like what, you know, is it attracting mostly, you know, a younger population, or is it a combination of, you know, is it more intergenerational? Mm-hmm. Well, describe like what, you know, sort of like what a typical member would look like.
Well, in fact, as I have said before, the different types of projects that Sostre Civic promotes makes it a quite diverse organization. However, the main target members is the one that is over 30, because the initial contribution that is required to enter in one of the projects, it's more usually a barrier to the youngest people. And this is why maybe the most general membership is above the 30 years. However, there are also lots of elderly, due to the senior housing cooperative projects that we will develop later on, and both in the rural areas and also in the cities along the territory and in Barcelona. It's the membership of Sostre Civic. It's quite diverse, as I've said.
So do you want to explain a little bit more about the right of use model, how you define that?
Yes, the right to use housing cooperative model stands in the collective management and property of the building, while in the private sector, it's individually that you own and manage it. And in the public housing, despite being quite insufficient the existing one, it's managed not by the tenants or the people living in it, but by external agents that most of the times make the quality of the service worse. In Sostre Civic, it's the members themselves, which are not tenants but are similar to tenants, that can manage their own issues and can even design the project as they will. They decide what common areas they want to put in the building, either a library, either some parking for bikes, and all these features promote the participation of the citizenry, which is way beyond Sostre Civic's aims, and helps the society in so many different forms by empowering citizens to take control of their lives, also in the area of housing. And this would be the most and the biggest difference with the other ways of forms of tenure, because when you rent or when you buy, you don't become the main actor, and you don't decide that collectively, but you just make a transaction in this sense. And this is a really interesting feature, and democratically, because the members of the board of Sostre Civic are chosen in a yearly assembly, and any relevant decision also goes through the general assembly.
And are the members involved during the development process as well?
Okay, so in order to answer this question, maybe first we should understand how a project is developed and what are the different stages, because depending on the type, some of these stages will already be done. This is normally a group is created, a group of people that share some affinity, they are friends, they share the neighborhood or whatever, and they start to look for a plot of land or a building that they can buy under Sostre Civic's umbrella organization. Other times, it's the Sostre Civic that acquires a plot of land and then asks for people to join and form a group that will develop the project. These are the two ways to begin a project: either first to have the group or first to have the real estate. And after that, once the group has the real estate, they have to define a project. If they just have a plot of land, the level of engagement of the members will be quite high, because they have to participate in the design of not only the building, but their way of understanding life and the needs that they will have to cover once the project is finished. Instead, if the building is already done and just needs some final refurbishment, or if the building is already livable, the level of engagement of members won't be that high, since they just have to arrange and get to know each other as simple neighbors, we would say. There is no design of the building, there is no design of the project, of the common needs, and this is also interesting because you can arrive to different sectors and with different capacities of engagement in the project, because if not, it would rely only in people that have free time, that normally have better jobs and come from certain social classes and with some economic backgrounds. In this sense, once the definition of the project is done, they have to look for financing. Again, this stage to look for finance for an entity that will fund the project is different. If you have to build it from scratch, that the amount will be way higher, and it will take longer, more meetings, more agreements to do, than those cases where the regional government provides the funding for already constructed buildings. In these cases, the engagement of members won't be that high, because the level of meetings and intensity won't be the same. And finally, the construction or refurbishment, depending again on what kind of project the group decides to apply, either from scratch or other kinds, the intensity and the effort, because we have to remind that the members are normally either weekly or every 15 days meeting to to define and to get to know each other, to know whether they will share certain aspects or not. Because despite the apartment being private, the common areas also play a really important role in Sostre Civic, and this cultural change that Sostre Civic promotes is also in this direction, to create communities and not just individual people that exercise their right to use. It goes beyond that. And these are the main stages that a group gets through: the creation of the group, the acquisition of the land or the estate, the definition of the project, financing, and finally the development and construction of the building or refurbishment if necessary.
Are there a lot of groups, that you mentioned earlier about groups coming together who are interested in forming a cooperative together? Are you approached by a lot of those groups?
Yes, in fact, in Sostre Civic we have 5 groups already living in their own buildings. We have 12 groups in the development process, which are about to finish, and here we have 200 people. And there are also another 12 groups that they still don't have the plot of land nor the building, but are in its search. And in total, this would make up to 350 people in groups in different stages, from out of 1,000 members that Sostre Civic has developed. In the cooperative has 10 years, and the association has just made 16. So yes, I mean, in 10 years to arrive to 1,000 members, it's quite a big.
Yeah, the interest is there. So you're doing a good job at promoting the model then. It's working.
And maybe now it's necessary to explain why Sostre Civic promotes so many different projects but constitutes just one only cooperative. Under this model in Catalonia, there are also some groups that constitute their own cooperative to buy or to acquire their own building, and they will end up being a kind of closed community if they don't decide to network or to collaborate. Sometimes they also decide to promote the model and to have an outdoor activity. In this case, Sostre Civic promotes different projects, but this makes possible to Sostre Civic to make sure that they won't sell the building once the community leaves or decides to take the money back because has been revalued the plot of land as a result of gentrification or other market pressures. And this is a guarantee for the collective property to be retained in the long run, whether individual cooperatives don't make sure that this will happen. It's just their commitment, their personal commitment, in groups of 15, 20, 25 people that can anytime decide to sell it. And besides, Sostre Civic's big impact is that it makes possible to put into contact members that have the same interests. And in this sense, if you are not linked to anyone in your daily life that it has this same desire, Sostre Civic promotes meetings for those members that want to create new groups and facilitate and boost this model beyond those already created groups and closed groups. Yeah.
And so where did Sostre Civic get its inspiration from? Because this is it's a unique model to Catalonia and probably in all of Spain, but this is a model that's been used elsewhere. So do you want to touch on where you got the inspiration to use this model?
Yes, well, the main reference have been the Andel cooperatives in Denmark before they were privatized and put their shares into the free market, more or less. And also the FUCBAM in Uruguay, also the Miethausen Syndicate in Germany, and the ABZ cooperative in Switzerland are examples of references to Sostre Civic, particularly those ones that are umbrella organizations, but not only, because the right to use housing cooperatives can also be, as we have said before, individual cooperatives, and have served as an inspiration to Sostre Civic too.
And this kind of emphasizes the importance of being connected, not only regionally, but also at the international level to learn about, it's the same model, but because it's such a flexible model that, it's tweaked to answer, the needs of the local housing situation. So you're using a model that's being used in Uruguay, which is slightly different than how it's being done in Switzerland or in Zurich. But it's almost like you're extracting the best elements out of, or the elements that work for your situation in Catalonia.
Yes, definitely. And it has been also very difficult because of this property culture that we have in Spain and in Catalonia, and also because during the Francoist dictatorship, it was the cooperatives were forbidden. So this whole tradition that was born in the beginning of the 20th century, and that has been reflected in other countries such as Denmark or Switzerland, in Spain was interrupted, and we had to begin from scratch again after a bit turbulent transition in the early 2000s. Is when Sostre Civic decided to gather all this experience that had been not only forbidden but also neglected and put in the well, it was not given importance, and it was a quite brave and maybe naive essay to launch this project. And now, 16 years later, we are proving that it's possible, and that that there is future in the housing cooperative movement in Spain, with the not-for-profit model against the speculative branch that some advocate for, and to ensure the right to housing in the long term. Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting. The ownership model is very dominant in many parts of the world. But if it's interesting to hear the history, with the dictatorship of Franco, and if you compare that to Eastern European, Central and Eastern European countries, former communist countries, where this was it wasn't a cooperative model, but it was a state-owned housing situation. And now any kind of social community-led housing is associated with the former communist regime, and people are, well, especially the more people that are in the political realms are viewing that as no, that stinks of communism, we don't want to facilitate that. So that's probably a similar situation with Franco, where it was viewed as something that was it was too socialist, and the state couldn't control it.
Yes. And in fact, this reminds me of this misunderstanding maybe that happens there of what's the housing cooperative movement, because it's not state-owned, not private, but community-led and democratic. It's a shame, because it's just the contrary that the state-controlled housing model, which is not participatory, which tenants do not have any power or decision-making process. Yes. Yeah.
Well, it's here. If I compare to here in Canada, it's still, co-ops are they're private co-op corporations. They're incorporated as a cooperative, and so they're entities of their own. But the government has developed programs in order to provide housing to people who, can't, don't have the, the economic means to buy a house or to pay, the market rents. They have facilitated programs through the co-op housing model to house people. So it's like, if you mention it, that you live in a housing cooperative here in Canada, people think it's public housing. They think it's government-owned housing, but it's not, except that the government has programs to facilitate housing people in housing cooperatives. So it's a little convoluted. Yeah. Let's talk about some specific projects that Sostre Civic has developed. Is there like one in particular that that stands out that you're working on at the moment? Do you want to explain some of the details on that?
I would begin with the first project that Sostre Civic developed, which is an historical building in the center of Barcelona that needed some refurbishment. It was empty due to that. Was owned by the city council, and they arrived to an agreement so that Sostre Civic would develop every refurbishment and remodelation tasks and works, and in exchange the city council would lend the use of this building for 75 years, which is the current contract that the city council of Barcelona is developing with other plots of lands and other buildings, so that this cooperative movement can make use of them. As a result also of the incapacity of the city council to develop its own programs without the financial help of the state, or without the financial help of other institutions. It's called Princesa 49, and it's made of 6 dwellings where 5 families are currently now living. And the project to acquire and the negotiations with the city council began in 2014, and while in 2017 the construction began, the construction refurbishment, let's call it like that, and 1 year later, in 2018, 4 years later from the initial talks, dwellers and members of Sostre Civic entered in here. 4 years of project may seem a lot, but in order to be the first project that Sostre Civic was making public and enabling for its members, it wasn't that much. The fees, the initial contribution to enter this project are 9,000 euros, and the monthly fees are between 400 and 500 euros a month, which is way below the market prices now in the area, which could be around 800 or 900 euros a month to a private company. With this first project, Sostre Civic gained the credibility and the structure to develop the rest of them that are now also ongoing, and one of those is La Balma, which is the first newly constructed building that Sostre Civic developed, 100% cooperative, because the construction cooperative, or the building cooperative, it's also owned by us, which is La Constructiva. And in La Balma, the plot of land was also granted by the city council for 75 years. And as Sostre Civic saw that the building sector is so corrupted, and that the extra costs that this corruption entails were not assumable, they decided to create La Constructiva. The project began in 2016 and is made of, and was just finished the construction last year in 2021, when the dwellers entered and members of Sostre Civic. It has 20 buildings with 7 floors. The structure is wooden. It's a really sustainable way of construction. And the initial contribution to enter to this project are between 30 and 40,000 euros, depending on the square meters of the apartment, which are from 2 to 4 rooms. And there are also a couple of apartments that have been granted to people with low income and marginalized backgrounds. And this is also a commitment that Sostre Civic has made, that in every promotion that it makes, a small percentage of the buildings will not only go to those that can afford to pay the initial contribution, but also to the rest. And this, within a not-for-profit organization, is really difficult to make, because the numbers are always really, really tight. And to reach to this point where we can afford to grant housing to marginalized communities, it's a big accomplishment. And last but not least, well, I would mention another project. It's called MUR, near Barcelona, in a city near Barcelona, like half an hour by car. And the different particularity of this project is that it's already built, the building, and was empty because of the financial crisis that exploded in 2008, left so many banks and building companies in bankrupt. Through a mechanism that maybe it's not working in other countries, but that in Spain some social entities have the right to exercise, is the preemptive right. Through this, Sostre Civic can decide to buy this building before it is sold to an investment fund or to corporations that come from abroad and try to gather all these cheap buildings that have been abandoned. Sostre Civic refurbished it, and since the beginning of the talks in 2018 until the members entered to live in 2020, only past 2 years, which is a really, really small period of time for a housing cooperative project. And it's also something relevant that we have taken it out from the speculative market, because if Sostre Civic wouldn't intervene, this would end up in a housing, no, in an investment fund, in a hedge fund, or any of these big banks and corporations that speculate with housing. The initial contribution for projects like this is really low due to the fact that has already been constructed, and the management cost is not that high. It's among 3,000 and 7,000 euros for the initial contribution, and between 400 and 700 euros monthly for the fee, depending again on the square meters. And like this, Sostre Civic has several projects using the preemptive right. And one probably it's not that spectacular as La Balma, that has been newly constructed with very, very advanced technological methods. But it promotes housing cooperatives, and it takes housing out from the market, which is the eventual objective of Sostre Civic.
So just to touch on the preemptive right, how does that work? Like, how do you have the ability to purchase these abandoned buildings before these, behemoth investment funds that, have tons of money to buy these half-finished buildings? How does Sostre Civic get in there first?
Well, so before signing the contracts between the owners of these buildings and the hedge funds, these have to be notified to the public administrations, in this case, the local government of Catalonia. And this provides every social housing organization the information of what buildings will be sold in the following 15 days. At this point, Sostre Civic intervenes and decides to acquire the building with the facility of the equivalent of the European Investment Bank, but at the local level, the Institut Català de Finances. And thanks to this financing, it's possible for Sostre Civic to begin with the project.
So this is enshrined in law then, and is this unique to Catalonia, or is it applicable throughout Spain?
It's applicable to Spain, but Catalonia has promoted this financing line from this public bank, we could call it, or financial institution, that without its support, despite having the right to buy it, the social companies and the social projects do not have the money to intervene. And in this sense, it was part of Sostre Civic and the sector's influence in the politics that it permitted to access to this funding, which is at really low interest rates and with really good conditions for us.
Okay. Well, let's talk about financing in a bit, but just to get back to some of the projects, there was one in an earlier conversation that we had prior to this podcast, the Walden 11 or the Walden 21 project for seniors, the senior co-op model. Do you want to explain that one?
Indeed. The senior housing cooperative projects are not new. Before Sostre Civic, there were several around all over the state, but they have been really expensive, and the initial contributions were really high, reaching 150,000 euros or even more. And what Sostre Civic has permitted is to lower a bit the price and to develop groups. Let's explain what's a senior housing cooperative project. Here, the participants are above 55 years old, and the need, it's not that much to satisfy their housing need, but their need of care and the need of aging collectively with a community that you know that will take care of you, where you can promote an active and participative process of reaching to the end of the life. And in this sense, the activities and the liveliness of the community remains quite high. Besides, the housing project also incorporates some services that the residents will decide, as they also design their own project, similar to the rest of the housing projects. And this could entail some nurse contractation of nurses, dining and restaurant services, and several other services that the community would decide. Walden 21 is the first of Sostre Civic, but Sostre Civic has also 2 other senior projects. This one began in 2017 and still hasn't begun the construction or refurbishing, but it's about to begin in 2022. These are even longer projects that take longer to develop due to the difficulty to look for financing. In this one, the initial contribution makes up to 45,000 euros, and the monthly fee it's between 900 and 1,300 euros, without the caring services that can reach up to 600 euros more per month. This is made of, if I don't remember wrong, it's almost 30 apartments. Yeah, you can check it at Sostre Civic's website, but it's a quite big number compared to the 5 apartments that were in the first Sostre Civic projects, and it's led by people, by the members themselves, by senior people.
Yeah, sounds well. I mean, there's a lot of people that are looking for alternative housing solutions in their later years, rather than living in a nursing home where you're kind of left to rot away, basically. Well, not necessarily, but it's definitely doesn't necessarily can take the community aspect into consideration. It's a lot of it is financial more than providing a nice place to live.
In a report talking about the senior projects in Spain, and during the COVID, those have been the residences where the lowest death rates have been found due to their structure and architecture of the building, the community life, and the way of management, self-management, actually. So this is an added value of the sector.
Yeah, that's interesting research, and research has been done on cooperative housing in general, not just for seniors, and they fared, members fared much better than other forms of housing, and community and solidarity is a huge reason behind that. I had a question about the initial contribution, because you mentioned that it ranges anywhere from like 4,000 to 9,000. So how is that calculated? Like how like what's the difference between someone paying 4,000 versus 8,000 to live in the same cooperative?
Well, if it's in the same project, the difference, it's also according to the square meters of the apartment, of the private part of the building. And in general, different projects, in some of them, it can reach 30 or 40,000 euros and corresponds to the 30% of the whole financing of the project. And because of our sources of funding require us to put first this amount of money. We are aware of the fact that it's a barrier for part of the population, and we hope that in the long run, 20, 30, 40 years later, the model have been already consolidated, and we can reach to lower initial contributions. And this is also an indirect way of introducing in the right to housing for the most needed ones, by creating a model that puts not profit but the use of the building first.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the access to land and finance, and touch more on the different collaborations or different partnerships that Sostre Civic has developed in order to finance all these different projects.
Well, so regarding the acquisition of land, currently there are three main sources. The first one is the grant of use by the public administration, and the leader in this aspect has been the City Council of Barcelona, granting the 4 plots of land to Sostre Civic. Then the other option is to buy private land, which it's generally not the most common way, because it's really expensive, and normally Sostre Civic tries to arrange grants of use of their land with the rest of the city councils and in the territories where they act. And the last one, apart from the grant of use and buying the plot of land, is the preemptive right. As we have explained before, the preemptive right allows Sostre Civic to buy a building that will end up in the hands of private investors by using the Catalan Institute of Financing, a public bank or public financial institution in Catalonia that permits to buy these private buildings. Sostre Civic has several financial mechanisms. The first and most obvious one is the initial contribution, the initial payment, that, as we have talked before, can range from 3,000 to 30,000 euros, depending on the project. Then there are financial organizations that allow Sostre Civic to launch these projects, and these ones are only ethical and solidarity banks, because the private banks and the traditional ones do not trust these collective projects and this other way of developing in a more fair way. And apart from these ethical banks, there is, as I have said, the Catalan Finance Institute, that apart from financing the preemptive rights exercise, it also finances social housing or those projects where Sostre Civic guarantees that the monthly fee won't be higher than the legally social housing and public institutions rent do. This is in Catalonia. By law, the public institutions, the few public housing they have, they are obliged to put it at a certain price normally, and it's below market. And Sostre Civic's monthly fees are, or at least this price, or even lower. And through this, if they comply with this condition, the Catalan Finance Institute finances the project. There are still 4 other financial mechanisms, and the most important of them is the participatory bonds, which is similar to the sustainability bonds that the ABZ has launched and that have been so successful. These represent around 5 to 10% of the project's financing, but it's key because the financial institutions normally fund 60, 70, 80% of the project, and if the community or the group cannot reach with their own initial contributions to this amount, the participatory bonds allow them to cover this gap. And the rest of the mechanisms would be the state grants, donations, and some state warranties that makes that the financial organizations are more open to cover and to give these grants. Normally, these are a 25 or 30-year lengths, and the interest rate, it's between the 2 and 2.75%.
So I have a question about the participatory bonds and the donations. I'm just curious who is contributing, who's investing in the bonds and who's donating.
Well, the investors of the participatory bonds are either members of Sostre Civic or other citizens that are engaged with the solidarity economy that trust this project will end up developing, and are common citizens that just decide to put their money in Sostre Civic and get back some interest rates. And the donations basically are some city councils that decide to give grants, but this is not like private donations. It's more publicly funded money. And
just a question again about the land leases. You mentioned that they're 75 years long. Is there a clause to deal with the end of the lease? What happens after the 75 years?
Well, once the 75 years are ended, the city council in principle will take the control of the building or anything over that plot of land. But given the impact that Sostre Civic is having and the social improvements around these projects, it is likely that in this period of time the city council will not be politically able to withdraw Sostre Civic from those buildings. However, who knows what will happen? What it's sure that during this period of time, these people will be able to live under the right to use housing cooperative model. And yeah,
75 years is a ways down the road, but it is going to it's going to arrive eventually. So yeah, it'd be interesting. We won't be around to find out. So just to wrap up, again, in our previous conversation, we talked about the steps that you're taking in Parliament to consolidate the cooperative path to the right of housing. So can you explain where you're at with that?
Yes, well, I will gather the point I was making about the Franco's dictatorship and its impact in the cooperative movement. This lack of consolidation and the need to begin from the scratch leaves us in a legally
fragile.
Huh?
Fragile. or
Yes, yes, framework, because it is not recognized, the right to use housing cooperative, but some city councils have put on some grants that define the model's characteristics so that we can opt for these funds. And but in general, at state level and regional level, there is no recognition of our particularities, the not-for-profit features, and it's a struggle to be able to profit from some fiscal advantages that other companies have and that we don't, just because there is no one that thought this was possible to be made. It's so borderline and so vanguard in this sense that we are constructing the whole legal model as we construct the model itself. In this sense, the Catalan regional government has recently approved a declaration giving support to this model, and it has been the first public document defining certain requisites or points, but it's not even a law. It's just a declaration of support, and it's not even at state level. That's even more difficult to reach. This movement is in the Spanish level, it's strong in Catalonia, but in the rest of the parts of the state, it's not so consolidated as it is in Barcelona and Catalonia, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a start. It's a good start. Yeah, it'll be contagious. Because there's high demand for other forms of housing, and Sostre Civic seems to be able to demonstrate the success of this model, and by doing so, it'll impact other regions, I'm sure.
Yes. And regarding the legal aspect, it's also relevant to show the government that in other countries it's consolidated, and that they should take as reference these other countries. Sostre Civic takes as model, and that support us to build our own legal framework.
Ander, thank you so much. This was a really interesting conversation to learn more about Sostre Civic and all of these interesting projects that Sostre Civic has realized and is continuing to develop. We'll be following closely, and especially now that Sostre Civic is a member of CHI, we will have a lot more opportunities to exchange and to learn from one another, and hopefully we will cross paths with you beyond your studies.
Hope so. Yes. Thank you very much, Julie, and thank you very much in the name of Sostre Civic for this opportunity.
Thank you for listening to this latest episode of Co-op Conversations. We hope that it provided a better understanding of what life is like in a housing co-op. If you're interested in finding out more, you can visit us at housinginternational.coop. We feature many stories and resources on our website with useful tools, studies, and articles on topics ranging from governance to finance to sustainability and so on. You can also find us on social media, on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram, where we like to share stories and good practices of co-op housing around the world. If you want to find a housing co-op in your region, I suggest that you do an online search for co-op housing along with the name of your city, and hopefully something will come up. I would like to thank all of our guests for sharing their stories with us. Thanks for listening.